Hey students, Mark Ferrier here. This video is going to go over the research essay. So let's talk a little bit about what you need to do for this assignment. Similar to the previous essays, has a similar outline in terms of how to follow through and read through the description and instructions. So that part of it you should be able to navigate, but let's go through some of the specifics. First of all, here is the range of word count that you want to be looking for. This should give you an idea of scope. And then also you need to make sure that you do reference at least 4 outside sources and 3 from the PIMA library database, okay? So you can have more than these sources. Let's say you find 4 from the database and you find 2 other outside sources. That's fine. Just make sure at a minimum you have 4 sources and then that 3 of them are from the database, and that will be indicated on your works cited page. Okay, so the purpose here, we really want to think about argumentation and research primarily. Argumentative meaning not a summary, not here's information, but you making a claim and saying here's my understanding of the story based on my research. And through that writing, you're going to demonstrate some critical thinking and you're going to persuade us of this subjective idea that you're trying to articulate in the reading, meaning here's how you're interpreting the meaning based on what you see, and it's an interpretive, so therefore you have to make an argument. You don't want to talk about what is clearly evident in the text. You want to focus more on what does this story mean to you and why. All right, so next up, why. You're going to develop those skills to help us develop reasoning needed to formulate your own ideas and then fit that into a worldview. So the instructions here, this is probably the most important part where you really want to be thinking about what to focus on in terms of at the early stages, at least, how to get started here. So for this essay and the final part of this course, you will explore the meaning of a text from a cultural, psychological, historical, or another perspective. What you really want to know here is that there are 2 prongs to this. You want to look at the meaning of a text, which is what does the story mean to you, how are you interpreting, and you're going to interpret that through a perspective here that we're calling context. So is it a cultural context you're looking at, psychological, historical, or something else? So I'll expand on these in a little bit, but just be sure here, you want to make sure that you are reading the story and then writing about it from a perspective that gives us, the readers, insight into what does the story mean based on your understanding of one of these contexts. Okay, so the meaning of a text, your interpretation, point to very specific parts of the text, and then talk to us about how that develops a meaning for you. The goal of the essay is to identify a theme or meaning in your chosen text and then explain that using outside research. So what do we mean by context here? Down here, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead and then I'll go back and then come back here. But for context, for example, we're talking about psychological aspects, philosophical, historical, or biographical. There's more, but let's hang on these 4 for right now. So if those are context, what we mean are factors outside the text that then influence, create, or modify its meaning. So if you're doing a psychological reading, you would want to talk about the meaning of a text from a psychological perspective. So for example, let's say I click on Psychology Today here, and this is a good place to start to get some outside research. I click on Psychology Today and it brings us to this website, and let's say here is an article on jealousy, why people can feel jealous of a partner's romantic past. So let's say you're reading a story and you do see some jealousy. It's not clear that they maybe have a romantic relationship, but you want to make an argument that yes, they do have a romantic relationship, and that relationship is based on jealousy. And then you would use this article that talks about the emotion of jealousy as a way to support your reading of the text. Okay, so that's an example of how you would use these. So similarly, let's say you wanted to talk about a historical aspect, you can start here, but any story that has every story is going to have a historical aspect. There's going to be psychological aspects. All of these exist in the story. Which one is important for you is going to be the question. So what you want to be careful of here is don't write about too many contexts or factors. Focus on 1 or 2. So let's go back to this psychological example. Jealousy would be a good one to focus on. You could talk about how jealousy is a psychological emotion that you're exploring, and then that's enough. But you don't want to list, for example, 5 psychological aspects, jealousy, and then 4 others. Focus on 1 to really bring out a close reading of the text. Or you can talk to a Pima librarian. Remember, we have those Pima librarian resources there that you've gone through already. You want to do some research and then write a paper. This actually is pretty important here with this Pima librarian. Make sure that you contact that librarian if you have some issues with your research. All right. The major elements of this assignment are going to be the research, documenting those sources. Make sure you keep track of, if you're using this article in Psychology Today, you want to make sure that you have the record the author and all that citation information so you can cite it in your paper. Now, so we've gone over here. Here's some other additional ones here that aren't directly linked to down here, but let's say you want to do a religious factor that thinks about it in a religious context, or one through economics. Let's say you want to talk about different economic strata, people below the poverty line, let's say, or you want to talk about the influence of wealth, and so on, other aspects of culture. All of these are options for you. You're not limited to these, but you do want to make a case and make very clear your thesis should identify what cultural context are you writing in. Okay, so let's go back up here to the to the instructions. If you're going to explore the meaning of a text from a cultural, let's say, if you're going to explore the meaning of a text from a perspective, your thesis wants to articulate, okay, here's what the meaning is, and here's the perspective that I'm looking at it, right? Broadly, that's what your thesis needs to include. So make sure you have that theme meaning in there, as well as the context in your thesis statement, okay? All right, so that's what you're going to do for this essay. A few reminders down here, right? The purpose of your research is to explain that meaning of the story. So if you say this story is about jealousy and romance, then you want to make sure you find research on that psychological component of jealousy to talk about in your paper, and use that, not just talk about it, but use that research to support your argument and your interpretation that the story is really about jealousy, okay? Don't just write reports of the author's life. Don't just talk about philosophical ideas. For example, don't just talk about jealousy. You want to say, because I'm reading this story as a jealous relationship, this is what it means for the meaning of the story overall. All right, so you want to not spend too much time giving us information, meaning informative, telling us facts, facts, facts. Here's what the author did in their life. Here's what jealousy means. Small amounts of that are okay. Largely, you want to say, here is my understanding of the story through the lens of jealousy that's supported by this idea or concepts within psychology that deal with jealousy. Okay. Use your research to help other readers gain a better understanding of the story. Assume we've read the story. You don't, again, have to summarize. And then make that connection between the text and the context. All right, make the connection between here's the text and here is the context. So here is our story by Poe or Virginia Woolf. Here's the context. We're going to look at a biographical aspect, or we're going to look at a philosophical aspect, and if we do that, this is what the story really means. Okay. If you've got a new insight, if the reader, right after reading the essay, let's say one of the goals is, oh, the reader can say, hey, that's a really fascinating way of reading the story. I never thought about that. So think of ways where readers would come in maybe surprised, or if they were just to quickly read the story, we're all going to get information very quickly and understand what's on the surface of the story. But what you want to do is, what's really happening here, where you can say, hey, reader, look at this. Maybe this is actually happening, right? Not the obvious, but something that only becomes clear after a closer, careful reading. So make sure you're formatting in MLA still. Be very clear in thinking about the focus. Tie that focus back to the thesis. Again, the thesis needs to say, here is the text, and this is the context also that I'm looking at. Who's your audience? This is going to be largely your classmates and me, people who have read the story, but people who you want to give a deeper understanding of the story. What goals do you want to accomplish? All right, so you have a certain meaning or reading of the text, and those are your goals that you want to convey to the reader. And then think about the choices you're going to make. So here's some listings here for suggested process. Don't forget, if we're talking about here, if the instructions say explore the meaning of a text, I've given you some context here, but you need to choose a text, right? So again, you should be very familiar with these. If we click on the reading selection options here, that brings you to the list of options for readings, and then you can go through and look at choose one you've written on already. That's okay. I'd like you to choose a different one, but if you really want to do one that you've written on already, I'll allow that. Just make sure it's different than an essay you've written before. So these are the stories again that you can choose from here. You can find these linked to in the assignment instructions, and then choose one specific research context. You may choose one of these or choose another one of your preference. And then once you've chosen your story and once you've chosen your context, go ahead and start the research process. Start looking for developing an annotated bibliography where you gather your notes, you gather your sources, you start talking about how those sources could be useful, and then you start drafting your essay. All right, so here's a few reminders, things that you want to keep an eye out and think about. If you have questions about any of these, go ahead and let me know by this stage. They should be familiar to you. And then here's some notes at the end about peer review. Okay, so to briefly sum up, you are writing an essay where you will explore the meaning of a text. You'll choose one of those texts from the suggested readings list. And then once you've chosen a text, you're going to interpret that text from a context, the ones that we listed here, psychological, historical, cultural, or something else. But you're going to explore the text through the lens of a context and then make an argument for that theme or meaning in your essay, supported by research. Don't forget at least 4 sources, 3 that have to be from the library. Okay, this video's gone over the research essay. If you have questions about this or anything else, let me know.